talking about Puritanism and colonialism. So let's just get right into it. So religion was the most influential cultural force on writers during this time period. Puritan values and beliefs dictated people's everyday lives as well as the formation of American society as we know it today. Many settlers in the 1600s were Puritans. Puritans were a group of English Protestants who had sought to purify the Church of England and return to simpler ways of living. So they came here in order to, be able to live out their beliefs freely. Their efforts were unwelcome in England, and many left the country and escaped to America in order to practice their free beliefs. So they wanted to escape persecution. So many Puritans believed that they were chosen by God to come here and settle in America and lead this, new idealistic way of living. So when you're chosen by God, you go and do it. That's what they thought. There was a guy by the name of John Winthrop who was part of this in 1630. He wrote that we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people will be upon us. So this was his musings. So Puritans' beliefs and values, they really did inform and dictate their way of living. They saw the human struggle as a sin, and so they set up daily missions and believed above all else that the Bible would guide them and help them solve every problem and lead them through their human weaknesses and so forth, and save them from the torments of the human frailty. Although they felt that humans were essentially sinful, they also believed that some people would be spared, that the elect, if you will, would be spared from God's eternal punishment. So hard work, responsibility, being thrifty, being obedient, being morally good, these were all things that they thought that, God was working within them and they would be chosen to be saved. So they took their thriving success in their villages and so forth as a sign from God that He was appreciating their qualities and their hard work, and He approved of it. They considered the good things that happened to them as, God's approval, and the bad things were God's punishment. There is another side to Puritanism as well, a darker side, where they sort of took it too far. They were very inflexible with their religious faith and their beliefs, and intolerant of anyone else's point of view except for their own. A good example of this is the Salem witch trials, where innocent community members fell victim to hysteria, this witch hunt, and I think that's where the term witch hunt comes from. They thought these women were marked by the devil, so they hanged them if they didn't confess to being evil or trafficking with Satan. And if you're a really religious person, you don't ever admit to trafficking with the devil, so they wouldn't sign their names to that, or they wouldn't admit, and therefore they would be hanged even though they were innocent people. So Puritan writing, what does Puritan writing look like, and what are we going to study? Puritan writing is very clear and straightforward and simple. There's not a lot of fluff. Even though I know that some of you, when you read, let's say for example, Sinners in the Hands of Angry God, you might consider it to be over flowery because of the use of metaphor and symbolism and the very big, large words that are used. However, back then, the writing was considered to be very plain and simple and straightforward. They believed that writing should be a tool, obviously, to deliver God's message and to interpret the Bible and to, help guide people in their daily lives. For this reason, logic, clarity, rationality, those were more prized than beauty and adornment. They treated writing as more of a, educational purpose. That is the purpose of writing in their society. For educational purposes. So there was the kind of writing that existed during this time were things like essays, histories, some poetry, sermons, obviously, and maybe some scientific works as well. The sermons deliver sort of like a hellfire and brimstone situation where, you were scared into being good because, if you weren't good, then you would, as Jonathan Edwards said, be burned like a spider held over a flame. So, obviously the poetry was also going to be a religious theme, so a lot of the motif during this time period is heavy on religion and virtue and, faith. With sermons and other writings, writers like Cotton Mather and Jonathan Edwards were a couple of these Puritan writers. And, they highlighted, sinful ways and doing good and being saved. They also wrote about scientific things, including inoculations for smallpox, and there was a couple of other ones too. But in Jonathan Edwards' best known sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, he highlights, what it is to be saved and not to be just an actor in front of God, but to truly be saved again and, recommitting to Christ. In his sermon, he's sure to emphasize those who don't do that are going to be treated with wrath by God. So imagine a scene in Edwards' first sermon. It became one of the most famous sermons around, and it was part of what we call the Great Awakening because so many people heard his sermon and were scared out of their minds, basically. He highlighted what a vengeful God we have. So when you highlight how vengeful God is, people were quaking in their seats, scared because they don't want to burn in hell, Anyway, the highlight of Puritan writing and sermons and other writings was pretty melodramatic. The melodramatic contrasts are between good and evil, and they have vivid imagery and powerful language, strong moral lessons, and this is what characterized Puritan literature. Poets like Anne Bradstreet and Edward Taylor, their views also explored religious themes, obviously, and they explored themes of the relationship of the individual and God, or that relationship between the person and God. So Bradstreet's poetry reflects a wide variety of learning, deep faith, and also her love of her husband and her children. They also provide insight into the position of women during this time. Women during this time period were obviously dominated by men. So her book of poetry was the first book by a North American woman to be published. And it was called The 10th Muse, Lately Sprung Up in America. That was written in 1650. Another poet by the name of Minister Edward Taylor, possibly considered one of the most famous, also wrote meditations or poetry in order to, further his faith. And, his poetry, like much of other Puritan writing, focused on vivid images and, everyday life to help readers really grasp their spiritual world and beyond. So join me next time when we come back here. I'll see you then. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!